don't see the record. Yep,
Okay,
now you're all
Okay.
set.
I see it.
we're recording now.
It's
Okay.
telling me it's being recorded too. I
Great.
got it. Okay.
So,
Good luck.
Yeah, we're recording. Okay, Charlene, I think we're good, although you're welcome to listen. I just really want Dave to be in the main.
It should be very illuminating.
All right.
Yes.
Enjoy your meeting.
So, this is for the Brown Rugby 60th anniversary celebration, and for the permanent archives that we're hoping to create and preserve in a central clubhouse facility that is in the planning stages as we work on the very elevated level of intergenerational involvement in the club, coming on the heels of a great season where they returned to the Ivy title after a 25-year lapse. So we're interviewing today Dave Olson, class of 1967, captain in 1967. And I'm John LeClaire. I was 10 when Dave was leading the Brown rugby team, and came in his legacy as captain in 79. And this interview is designed to, well, in concept, present Dave as an exemplar of the Brown Rugby Club experience in the 60s. But I hope that we can explore the impact of it on your life subsequent to the 60s. I know we had a little warm up, and there's a great story about your first weekend on the Brown rugby team. It was quintessentially 60s. So Dave, take us, who's speaking from California, where he's had a very productive and happy life ongoing. Tell me, just take us back to your time on the Brown Rugby Club in the 60s, 63 presumably to the spring of 67. What was it like? Just bring us back there.
Well, John, I'll try as best I can. It was something that I first began thinking about when Dave Zacconi, who was the admissions officer assigned to California, talked to me a little bit about the rugby program when he interviewed me prior to my applying to Brown and ultimately going to Brown. I think the two things, and maybe we touched on this a little bit in our previous conversation, but I really think of two things. One is that I always had a great deal of pride for the Brown rugby program, and program is maybe makes it seem a little bigger than it really was. It was really Dave Zacconi and the seniors who were running the program. And I think I mentioned it really helped me develop a sense of, well, one, pride, but also ownership of the program. And I think all of the players felt that with David, primarily because we were trying to help him get it going. Dave was a guy that had many ideas, and they were all good. It's just he tried to do them all, and it didn't always work out exactly the way we wanted it. But I think that was the 60s. The team had had some success up to the point where I became involved, and it was largely through. And I made a few notes because I don't want to trust my memory completely on this thing. But the people like Eric Lane, Ron Strasberg, David Zacconi, of course, Pete Smith, and Terry Walsh, to name a few, were the ones that were there and carrying on this relatively new program. I think, well, it must have been 1960 or thereabouts exactly that it got started. But I think of my first introduction to Brown rugby as an example of how this worked. David,
Tell me about that.
yeah, well, that was, I had played freshman football, and I thought about going. We were invited to go. All the freshman football players were invited to go out and try out for lacrosse, and I knew nothing about lacrosse, but I went to the tryout. I had been talking to David about playing rugby, and this was in the fall or early winter of '63, and I was told when I asked the coach what the rules were, he said, "Well, don't worry about the rules. You see that big guy out there with the stick. Whenever the ball comes close to him, just whack him." And I thought about that, so that's what I did. Well, I found out they could return that, and I decided that was not the sport for me. So I told David I wanted to come out for the program. He approached me in probably late December, early February. And I'm a Californian, and I'm getting used to living in a climate that's different from the beach towns in Southern California that I grew up in. And David came to me and said, "Are you interested in playing in a rugby game, a match?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I don't know much about it." He said, "We're going down to a tournament in New York City, and we'll drive down and play, and then we'll come back." And I really didn't know what driving to New York was all about, but I was on board. And those same guys, Eric Lane, Ron Strasburg, Terry Walsh, I was in the car, and I had again raised the issue of rules of the game, and they said, "Well, we'll teach you on the way down." Well, and that's what they did. They talked to me about the rules. The match was a 7-a-side match, which I had not had any prior exposure to, and I was. It was in the 7th Street Armory, not near Park Avenue or not far from Central Park, and I was really thrown out there, and it was great. I enjoyed my experience, and it helped me remember when it occurred. It was February 7th, 1963. As it turned out, the Beatles were arriving in New York just as I was arriving in New York for my first rugby match. And I can't remember whether we won or lost, but the success we did have and the experience and the camaraderie was clearly evident to me, and I made the decision at that point that this was a sport that I really wanted to be involved in. And
So
the
was
Brown
it the case
program.
that there was not a coach, but Dave and the seniors effectively were the coach? And with that, do you have a thought on how Brown rugby became so dominant, even certainly a winner, so quickly?
Well, there were other experienced players that came through the program while I was there. And I could go into my hallway. There's a couple Brown pictures that would identify who they were. Some of them were faculty with a rugby background from the UK or one of the other rugby countries. And I think that was the technical education that we got from those players with prior experience. As I said, they had played for their entire life, and we were anxious to learn. The other thing is the Brown sports programs, particularly the contact sports, were not doing terribly well back in those days. And with some success came the desire for more success, because some of the football players had not had a winning experience playing football. And rugby was one that was a winning program, and that attracted players and it kept players. And as I said, everyone felt an ownership of the program, its success, and that was very fulfilling.
Was there the social aspect to it that I recall thinking of, discovering when I came on the team as, if not unique, then a certain feature of it?
Well, the players got to know each other, obviously. I don't know that there was a lot of socializing off the field in non-rugby events. There was always the camaraderie of getting together after a match and going to have a few beers or either whether we were traveling or whether we were at Brown.
That with the other team?
That was usually it would be with the other team. Some of it was more structured. I always think of the most interesting post-game experience that I had. It was one, actually, it was, I traveled to the UK with the Old Blue. They had invited me to and actually Dave Zacconi was on the trip, and I think maybe Eric Lane. We were invited to tour with Old Blue, and we were in Dublin, and then Wales, and then the UK. Well, we played a match in Bridgend, Wales, and after the match, I played on the wing at that time. The Old Blues had a outstanding scrum half that had been there for some time. But I can remember coming into the locker room after the match, and there was you changed and you went into another room, and there was a huge pool. It was a big giant bathtub full of naked rugby players, and they would come around with a pitcher of shanty beer, which is beer and lemonade. And you had a mug or a glass, and they'd fill it up. And I jumped into the tub, and here's this Welsh prop sitting next to me, and we started talking. He said, "Oh, you were the winger," and I said, "Yeah." I said, "I recognize you as well." So that was an experience, and I think that was probably my sophomore year. Yeah, that was where I was playing scrum half continuously.
Your teams won some games. It was pre the Ivy tournament. Do you have any recollections of high points?
I think the tournaments were probably more the focus. The Ivy leagues, the Ivy structure really wasn't there. I know we played Harvard a few times, but it wasn't it wasn't the same structure that existed today. We would have played some other Ivy teams. We played, we played Holy Cross. We played Williams, Amherst, and a lot of club rugby out of New York and out of Boston. And we would play, if I remember playing Princeton only because we beat them so severely after they had annihilated the football team that same year, that we had some of our football players that had lost to Princeton almost in tears over the joy of having creamed them. I think we beat them 53-0, which, scoring 53 points in rugby in those days was, unheard of.
Was it more of a defensive game? Do you think?
No, we didn't try to play it defensively.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to have some defense, but it was something that Zacconi was a wing, and he wanted to score. He wanted the rest of us to score. So we really we worked hard on our offense, and I think we were a pretty free flowing. It was more structured in terms of set plays and the ball didn't move as quickly, particularly for me as a scrum half. Hands in the scrum was something that, you really had to be concerned about because the referees called it. and you had to release the ball. It was very different in that regard from today's changes, which I believe have been made to make the game more free flowing and attractive to spectators and players.
Have you stayed in touch with the program over the years? I know you kept playing and played at a high level after.
Well, I did. Every time I came back to Brown, I would see people that I knew. Jay Fluke was a close friend, or is a close friend, that I met through rugby, even though he was a few years ahead of me. And I've played I'm sure I've played every rugby, every alumni match at any reunion that I've come to. I played the last reunion that I was at. I know Jay was a little concerned, and he was worried a little bit about me playing. What was I, 50, 60, 70? Yeah.
Well done.
So I said, well, I'm going to work out tomorrow morning. Why don't you come on down to the field, Aldrich Dexter? I'm just doing some, and I went down and I was working out, doing some interval sprints on the rugby pitch, and he came over and he said, well, I think it's okay for you to play. I was training for the Tokyo Marathon, so I was in good shape. I'd been running marathons for, since 2010.
And this is at age 70, Dave?
At 60, I ran Boston.
Yeah.
And I just ran London. I ran London in 2018. So I was in shape. And so I've really enjoyed coming back to those matches, and that's been the connection that I have enjoyed greatly.
I remember when I was playing, I would look at the history of Brown rugby and think about, these guys, Mike Diffley, Pete Smith,
Oh, yeah.
Dave Olson. Have you do you feel a connection to the folks that came after you, or today's players, say?
I have a connection and pride in what they've done to keep this program going, and achieving the level of success that they have. And while I may not have had the opportunity, just primarily because of distance, to get to know some of them on a personal level, I keep an eye on the success of the program, and I still feel that ownership as part of the program. So I've had a little bit of an exposure to some of the other types of programs that are available today in rugby. After I got when I left Brown, I went to UCLA for law school, and I played 3 years at UCLA, and I was captain all 3 years at UCLA. And it was a dramatic change from Brown, in the sense that it was a structured program. There was a university. The coach, Dennis Storr, an Englishman, was on the coaching staff. He was a full-time employee of the university. We had, when we traveled with trainers. We played all the Pac-10 in those days teams. We had a very, very strong team. It was interesting when we went to the Santa Catalina tournament in 1967. We played
That was
UCLA
with Brown, right?
With Brown.
Yeah.
We went to the Catalina tournament, and then afterwards we played UCLA at UCLA and beat them. And so I got to know Dennis Storr, the coach, after we had played them, and So I ended up going to UCLA for law school. I ended up going out for rugby. And it was a different experience because it was a structured, university-owned, sponsored program. And we played SC and Cal. I never lost to Cal. I never lost to SC. I never lost to Stanford in rugby. And we ended up replacing Cal as the traditional yearly rival of the University of British Columbia. So we played British Columbia when they came down from up north, and we traveled to Vancouver, British Columbia, to play them. And yet we had great success, but I didn't feel the same closeness that I feel to Brown. I'm proud of what UCLA has done, but I don't have the same pride of ownership, if you will, that I do towards the Brown program.
You know, the Brown curriculum, which exists today, came in after you left, only a few years after you left. And I was a young kid at the time, and there were epical changes right, maybe while you were there and certainly right after. It's very much based on self-determination. And I always thought that the rugby club, as it existed when I was there and still, had a lot of self-determination, autonomy. It was, I don't want to say do it yourself, but it had an aspect of that which really affected positively the way my career and life went afterward. It sounds like an element of the same for you. Has your rugby time at Brown affected your life since then, besides the connection and pride?
Well, it exposed me to a sport that I had a 10-year career, and it started in the car driving to New York with a bunch of guys to play in a 7-a-sides match.
With the Beatles landing concurrently.
With the Beatles landing, and I thought it was appropriate that there was that everyone was excited about the Beatles, and I was excited about coming down to play my first rugby match. And I played for 10 years as a result of my experience at Brown. I continued on playing, and I think I mentioned this to you before. I ended it as part of a 5-week sponsored tour of New Zealand, playing in the last match of that tour at Eden Park in Auckland, in front of about 25 to 30,000 people on national TV in New Zealand against the Maori All Blacks. And I recall the tradition, anytime you're playing a New Zealand major team, they come out and they do the haka, which is a Maori war dance. And I remember standing in the middle of the field with the rest of our team, and the Maori All Black team doing their haka dance right across the midline, and looking around and thinking, you know, this is a pretty wild experience. So so I think that all of those things help me achieving, you know, what I feel I've achieved to this point.
Are you in touch with the guys you played with?
I am. Again, it's they have an organization that an alumni group, if you will. And when I'm down at UCLA, I try to catch up with some of the guys that I did play with. I was fortunate enough to be inducted into the UCLA Hall of Fame for rugby.
And the Brown Hall of Fame too.
Yes. Yeah, I was fortunate in that regard too. So I have some people down there that I like to try to stay in touch with. And I have the advantage, my youngest son, played football at UCLA. So we were down there a lot. And I saw a lot of people then. So.
What else would we cover? I don't mean to break the flow of this at all. What do you think is the key? What are the keys to being an effective rugby player and teammate?
Well, I think one is that you have the ability to communicate with each other. I think that rugby is, at least in our day, rugby wasn't as free flowing, but you still had to have some discipline and support for your teammates, and you had a certain responsibility to get yourself prepared and get into position. This may not be really as on point to your questions as it should be, but that was the thing that I thought we had, was the ability to support each other and continue momentum of the play. And so.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a view on, Dave, whether if rugby had the chance to be a varsity sport versus a club sport, would you choose to be a club sport? Oh, there are Title IX implications of that, and there's no movement at all for that to happen, although women's rugby at Brown is a varsity sport.
Yes.
I always thought that being a club, playing at the highest level of intensity, was just sort of like, for me, the perfect thing. I love that. But do you have a view on club status?
I remember thinking when I got to UCLA and I saw the level of support that the university provided, I thought that was great. I thought, the idea of having we had our own locker room. We had a rugby field right next door. We had trainers there. We traveled on the university's budget. But I loved the guys I played with. A lot of them were varsity football players. So the physical side of things changed a little bit, particularly when we were playing SC or Cal or Stanford. But as I look back on it, as much as I enjoyed the success that we had at UCLA, measured against the success we had at Brown and the camaraderie, I really have taken more away, I think, from the Brown program than I did from UCLA, because of that ownership and pride, and that's continued on in my feelings towards the Brown program.
Well, I also think it's an aspect of, you come to college, you're on your own, you really are, you've gone from boys basketball or boys whatever to men's rugby, you're a man. And there's something about, I think, that first experience of that with the guys you do it with that has always just stayed very resonant with me.
Well, I agree. I think that as I was saying, that's where the pride comes in, and the ownership. That's the feeling, that at least the way I describe it, that I have towards the Brown program. And
I think you've used that word ownership a few times, and I really think you've hit something that I had kind of not articulated in this before, that as a club, as the way Brown rugby is, due to the success, you feel that sense of ownership, responsibility, commitment, connection, maybe even more than if you played in a varsity program and it was all set up for you so much. It's more set up that way now. But yeah, I've always felt that word that you've used, ownership and pride.
well, yeah, and it was it was a wonderful experience. And, as I told you, coming from California, beach towns in California, I had never been east of the Mississippi River before I came back and landed. I remember flying into to Boston, and I'm looking down and I'm going, shit, look at all the trees. I mean, it was unbelievable. So that was a big part for me, going places. I remember playing even freshman football, going to UConn to play the freshman football team at UConn. It was in the fall, the colors of the. So anyway, it was always, everything was a new experience, and rugby fit right in there, believe me.
Any other distinct memories of it? People you looked up to?
We had a lot of success, and clearly the Pete Smiths and Ron Strasburgs and David Deutsches and all the other people that I played with or learned from were responsible for it. I think of the trips to Bermuda, or the first trip to Bermuda, the Commonwealth Cup in Virginia, when we won that. We beat, I think it was Notre Dame. We beat in Charlottesburg. The Penn State tournament, which we won. We were very competitive with club sports down in New York Rugby Club and Old Blues. I don't know how much the university today plays the club teams. I have a clear sense of that, but that was a big part of our schedules, were the club teams, club sides.
These days, the format is a formal Ivy program. Every weekend, you play all 7 teams, and then a structured set of playoffs and a warm-up. I don't want to call it a warm-up match, but a preliminary before the league season matches with West Point or URI. So it's it's interesting because the Ivies are at the high level completely competitive with anybody in the country, and at the low level, Penn, Cornell, you can roll up 100 points on them, which is unfortunate. You'd like a balanced league. And then the spring is a tour and a lot of 7s. So the Ivy tournament, which started in '69, always the mid like Easter week and in April, which was a huge deal when I was playing in the '70s and for 35 years afterwards. The season in the fall was important, but the spring season with the tour and the Ivies were the big thing. We were still playing clubs. We would play Beacon Hill, we'd play in the New Englands, we'd play Boston, Mystic River. But now that club overlap is not as much of a thing, or even a thing. It's playing against divisions, ranked divisions. And like with English Premier Football, you can fall out of a division. Brown, in fact, in the early 2000s, hit a rough patch, Brown Rugby, where many of the other schools, Dartmouth in particular, went into recruiting, enormous financial support, international players, and they just left Brown behind. And the story of Brown in the last 15 years has been a rebuild to that level while still retaining all of the elements, connections, essence of what was laid down by the guys of your era.
I would tell you that things were much less structured back in our era of the '60s. I think I may have mentioned the experience that Pete Smith and I had with Holy Cross. when
Oh, yeah.
they invited Pete and I to come to the Monterey tournament in California with them as members of their team, which for me, a Californian going home, that was a great opportunity. And we talked to Dave, and there was an opening in the schedule, and so Pete and I were flown back to San Francisco and joined the Holy Cross rugby team for the visit to the Monterey tournament. We also played a game against University of Santa Clara, which I didn't realize was also a Jesuit Catholic school. And little did we know that there was a rivalry between Holy Cross, I believe was a Jesuit high school,
Yeah, no, it is.
and University of Santa Clara. And we found ourselves in the middle of this grudge match between these two universities, trying to determine who was the best rugby program and the toughest players. And as an Episcopalian, I had no skin in the game in that sense. So,
But I bet you look
but
good in
it's-
purple uniform, though.
yeah. Well, it just gives you an idea of how less structured rugby was at the collegiate and the club level
Oh, yeah.
back at that period in time. So it's very different, and I'm not saying everyone it should have stayed that way at all, but because Brown has had great success, and I'm sure the players feel the same way about it as we do about our time back in the 60s.
No, that's the timeless essence of it. You, I understand, won't be able to be at the 60th, though you'll be at your reunion. And who knows, maybe out there on the wing at age, what, 75 or whatever you are.
77.
77.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to play this time. Unfortunately, I was training for the Paris Marathon just when COVID came in, and I ruptured my quadricep muscle, which it's now back. I've rehabbed through all of that, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to play in the alumni match, which is always something I look forward to. But I am going to be there, and I'll watch it with great interest. So,
Well, not to put you on the spot, but since you won't be at the 60th, won't be able to be at the 60th, and since you're as an iconic foundational guy in the program, you have anything to convey or say to the guys here at this dinner that followed you, the players today who brought home the Ivy title, and people who haven't yet arrived in the program but will, and will carry it forward?
I can say thank you. Thank you for creating an experience that was unique, memorable, and lasting.
Well, I'm sure they would say thank you for laying the foundation of fellowship and winning and an extraordinary experience back in the 60s when the Beatles landed and Brown rugby started to kick butt all over the country.
Yeah, well, it was a great experience. It still is, following the success of the program.
That's great. I think we've covered the topics. Anything else you want to say?
No, just I wish I were going to be there, and
you are
I
going to
hope
be there.
at the reunion.
You're going to be there on this recording, and
Oh, okay.
and you may yet play at 80.
Well, God willing, I don't know. We'll see.
You and Ned Corcoran and Mike Lancaster, guys from my era who played
I see. Okay.
at our most recent reunion. All good. Well,
Yeah,
Dave, I
it
have
is
just
indeed.
enjoyed this tremendously. I do hope to meet you in person one day. I may have to show up at are you on a 5-year reunion this year?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll have to show up for the alumni game, though I'm not so I can meet you in person.
Well, I'll be there either on the field or in the stands.
I'll be there in the stands. All right,
Thanks
Dave, great
very much.
talking.
Take
Good
care.
luck. You
Good
too.
luck. Go
Bye.
Brown.
Go Brown, the RFC.